So just a little quick reminder, really, of what we're looking at. We started to look at the seven dispensations as part of, how the Bible is kind of carved up, if you like, or a way to carve up the Bible called dispensationalism. The word means a system or an order, a government or an organization of a nation or a community or something, and especially that it exists in a particular time. And looking through the Bible, we can find, and we do find, seven distinct dispensations, ways of doing things that were God ordered, God ordained, and each dispensation has a purpose in the overall story. I think I said this the last time. Some people, some theologians and studies of the Bible break it down into even a whole lot more than that, like a whole lot more, and kind of fragment it up. But I think for us, for what we want to look at, we're right to do it this way. We can look at them, and we will look at them. Well, there we go. We will look at them following two formulas, if you like, two things. The first one being that this one here, God's intentions. God's intentions. What was the divine plan for each of the dispensations? What did God intend to happen? Then we have man's response. How did humanity react to this direction given by God? And then we have God's reaction. How did God respond to humanity's action? What did God do about what happened in response to his direction, if you like? So we've got God's intentions, man's response, and God's reaction. God's reaction. And then we'll follow it through with the next one as well, Matty, please. What happened? We put these sort of 6 headings around every one of them. Who was involved? What was expected? God's words, the key revelation or the commandments, what was it all about? Man's failure, how the people fell short. Judgment, the consequences of this, or the divine justice, however you want to put it. And then the last one, the grace. How did God extend his mercy? How did we get into the next dispensation? Because they all start as a consequence of God's grace at the end of the one before. We looked at 2. We looked at the dispensation of innocence. Right at the start in the Garden of Eden, God gave people responsibility. They failed to meet his requirements. They suffered judgment. Then God provided grace and hope for the future. The people in it were Adam and Eve. The time period was the creation of man to the fall, to man's yielding to temptation. The responsibility that they had was to obey God, God's given words. Fill the earth with children, subdue the earth, have dominion over the animals, care for the garden, but abstain from eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge. And what was the failure? Disobedience was the failure, and the judgment was the curse and death that followed, and exclusion from the garden. God then put this new one in place, a consciousness in humans where they could delineate between good and evil. And God said, if you choose good, you'll be accepted, and if you don't, you won't be. And he gave them that way to have a relationship with God. The people were Cain and Seth and their families. The time period was from the expulsion of the garden, from the Garden of Eden until the flood. So that was about 1600 years. Human responsibility was to do good and offer sacrifice. God's given words, there were 5 major aspects of it. There was the curse on the serpent, a change in the role of women, a curse on nature, imposing difficult work on man to produce food, and then the promise of Christ as the seed who will bruise the serpent's head. It failed because of wickedness straight away. Cain killed Abel, and then we had that problem of wickedness that came in. Judgment came, the flood. Grace, Noah and his family were saved. And that leads us on to where we're going to start tonight with the third one, which is the dispensation of human government. It's called human government. Genesis chapter 8, verse 21 through to chapter 9, verse 7. I'm going to read the verses for us. Genesis chapter 8, Pat. And we'll begin reading at verse 21. Or we'll start at verse 20, actually. It seems better. Genesis chapter 8, verse 20. It says this: Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done, while the earth remains. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and every bird of the heavens, and upon everything that creeps upon the ground, and all the fish in the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man and from his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of a man. Whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. And you be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it. And that's what God said to Noah at the start of the dispensation of human government. It began, as I said, just after the flood. God made promises and he gave commands to Noah and to his family. God promised he would never curse the earth again. He would never flood it again. He commanded Noah and his sons to repopulate the world and scatter across the earth. And he allowed them to use animals for food. If you remember back to the age of innocence, God said, I've given you every green plant and every herb and all of these things, and you can eat whatever you like that grows, anything with seeds in it, apart from the tree of life. Apart from that tree that you cannot eat from. You can eat any plant you want. Now we're seeing a change. God is saying, you can eat it. We go from vegetarian to, the word's just gone out of my head, omnivores. Eat what you like, but it has to be cooked. Don't eat it alive. So that's a good tip for you. If you swallow a fly when you're cycling, or if you get a fly in your mouth, spit it out because it's still alive. Just a little cheeky thought, you would have a little chew on it. But these are some of the things that are changing. God is changing the dynamic, and he's saying things are different now. Things are different now. You can eat what you like, repopulate the world, and go and fill the earth as God commanded them to. So God gave Noah a set of expectations that he had, and he wanted them enforced. And he also introduced capital punishment. Whoever sheds the blood of a man, by man shall his blood be shed. That's what he said, for God made man in his own image. This command established first and foremost the sanctity of human life and the authority of man to govern man, and that still continues on today, doesn't it? Flick over to Romans chapter 13, you see, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there's no authority except from God. God is laying all these things out. Populate, multiply, fill the earth, eat what you like, don't kill each other, because that's not acceptable. All of these things, God is laying them out for them. God is laying them out. God had already destroyed the earth with a flood, and he comes to this. His grace has saved Noah and his family. And that was enough. That was enough for God to repopulate the earth, if you like. So that's what they had to do. God laid out his intentions, God's intentions, very clearly. I will not curse the earth again. Noah and your family, you're to replenish the earth with people. You'll have dominion over the animal creation. You're allowed to eat meat. Capital punishment is established. There'll never be another worldwide flood, and there is a sign in the sky to remind you of that, and that is a rainbow. And God put all of those things in place. Man then had to make a response, and man's response was the problem. And we can read about man's response in Genesis chapter 9, down to verse 9, really. God said to Noah, or I'll read verse 8, sorry. God said to Noah and to his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, with every living creature that is with you, the birds and the livestock, and all of those things. As many as came out of the ark, it is for every beast of the earth. And he goes on, and that's what he says they are able to do. You're able to do. But then we get a problem, because, as you would expect, that's not what they do. That's not what happens. That's not what they do. And we get the written response in the Bible in the next chapter, in chapter 11, beginning at verse 6. Man's response, God says, And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people. They have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they purpose to do will be now impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and they are confused their language. And the problem was, they decided, if you want to look at the start of chapter 11, they decided, and they were all together in one place, and they were going to build a tower, Babel's tower as it became known. They were going to build this tower, and they were going to see themselves as some great people who built this tower. And that was their response. That was their response. Their disobedience was they didn't go and multiply and fill the earth and they all stayed together. They failed to do what God had asked them to do. That was basically it. That was basically it. Instead of following after God's provision, people created their own idols. They fell into moral degradation as well. People relied on their own selves, and they were elevating their reason above God with this tower. They said, Come, let us build ourselves a city, one city, one city. They were all together, a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. In other words, what God had told them to do, they were rebelling against it and saying, we don't even want to do that. We are staying here, and we are going to be great, and we're going to build this great tower, and we are not doing what God told us to do. So that was their response. God's intention, go out, multiply, fill the whole earth. Their response was, we're staying here because we are great. We're staying here. So God reacted to that because it was disobedience. This was disobedience to God, and the consequence was that they lost their ability to communicate with one another. God said, let us go down and let's confuse them. It's kind of what we were talking about this morning, isn't it? You know, the power of the Lord. The power of the Lord. When the crowd was standing in front of Pilate shouting, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him, what would have happened if this had happened? If the Lord had said, let's just confuse them. Let's make them think they're shouting, crucify him, but they're shouting, let him go free. I think sometimes we don't dream up enough of what God could do. What God could do. And that's not making things up. Here it is, it's happening. God came down, and every single person on the planet couldn't understand what they were saying to each other. They couldn't understand what had happened to them. They didn't understand. They could no longer communicate with each other. And they left, and they went their own separate ways and learned the language that maybe God had put in them. Made up a new language, whatever they did. Well, they went away, and they no longer could live together because they couldn't communicate with each other. God always has an answer, doesn't he? God always has an answer. They couldn't communicate with each other. But we still see in the middle of it all, as that was coming to an end and that was the closing out, God's reaction was, I'm going to make you do what I wanted you to do. I'm going to make you do that. The grace of God still came in there, had to come in, didn't it? Had to come in. God's grace, God demonstrated his grace in choosing Abraham and his descendants to be those whom through their line the Messiah would come to redeem the world. Genesis chapter 12, where it all starts. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. Then in Galatians 3, we get these words. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. It does not say, and to his offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring who is Christ. It was a promise that was made to Abraham, that he would have descendants. So the 6 parts, they're not there, but the 6 parts for us as we look at the summary of the dispensation of human government. The people were Noah and his family, that's where it all started, just the 8 of them. The time period was from the end of the flood to the confusion of the tongues at the making of the Tower of Babel, give or take 430, 440 or so years. The responsibility that they had, what God said, was to scatter and multiply. Their failure was they didn't do it. They refused to do it. They said, let's build a tower, lest we get dispersed over the whole earth. The one thing God told them to do, one of the things God told them to do is, we're not doing that. Their failure was to refuse, and God's judgment on them was confusion. You want to stay here together, I'm going to make it impossible for you. And God dispersed them over the earth as he wanted. The act of grace was Abraham has chosen the start of the nation of Israel, the start of the Jewish race, if you like. And that moves us into the second one we want to look at this evening, this dispensation. And this one is called promise, the dispensation of promise. So we've had the human government, we've had that, and now we're into this dispensation of promise. The dispensation of human government lasted until this call of Abraham. Abraham, what a guy. The lives of the patriarchs, if you like, the enslavement of the Israelite people in Egypt, all happen under this dispensation of promise. They all happen there. This was the time that Abraham's descendants waited for the promise that was given to Abraham, that God would make Abraham's descendants a great nation and give them their own land. You can read it, Genesis chapter 12. It starts there from verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abraham, go from your country, your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. So Abraham went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abraham was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abraham took Sarah, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. And when they came to the land of Canaan, Abraham passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak at Morah. And at that time, the Canaanites were in the land. And so it goes on, and you can read on if you want to know a little bit more about it. But God's promise to him was, Abraham, I'm going to make you the biggest name in the world. I'm going to make you the father of a nation that will bless every nation in the world. I'm going to give you descendants that will be like the grains of sand on the seashore. You won't be able to count them. These were all God's promises to Abraham. These were the things that were bringing in this dispensation of promise, the change from human government to Abraham's blessings. There was something different though. There was one fundamental thing that was different here. It was different here. in establishing this, the start of it, if you like, in the covenant with God. God made an agreement with Abraham, but there's something in it that we haven't seen up till now. We haven't seen up till now. It's in chapter 15 when we get to it. But here's a sort of summary of God's intentions. God made an agreement with Abraham, promising him land, descendants, and blessings. That's the sort of border of it, if you like. But for the first time, we kind of have this faith-based relationship with God. Unlike previous dispensation, this period emphasized faith as a means of righteousness, if you like. Abraham's belief in God. And I'll read the verse to you. It's Genesis chapter 15, verse 6. It says, "And he believed the Lord," and he, that is God, "counted it to him as righteousness." Counted it to him as righteousness. And he said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess." To give you this land to possess. But he said, "O Lord God, how am I to know that I shall possess it?" But it was counted to Abraham for righteousness to believe. We've already mentioned this. There would be the blessings on all nations. God's promises extended beyond Abraham's immediate family through the lineage. All nations would be blessed. And that is a direct foreshadowing of the coming of Jesus Christ. And it was preparing Israel. The name's Abraham. The promise given to Abraham that Isaac and Jacob laid the foundation for the nation of Israel, and Jacob indeed became the father of the tribes of Israel, and he would later receive in this dispensation, if you like, the Mosaic law. So man, if you like, Abraham only had one response. He only had one response. And that was, it was very clear from God that through Abraham's line, that Abraham's descendants, this great thing was going to happen. This great thing was going to happen. And I think Abraham did what many of us do today. What many of us do today, and it's a great lesson for us. They began to doubt the miraculous power of God. They began to doubt the miraculous promise of God. They were aging a little bit, and they were doubting that they would ever have a child of their own. So how is this going to happen? We've got this promise from God that our descendants are going to be this biggest nation in the world. We're going to be this massive blessing to the world, to the earth, to every nation. We are going to bring a blessing, but we're getting old and we don't have any children. So how's that going to be? How's that going to be? And they decided to take matters into their own hand, and Abraham went with Sarah's handmaiden Hagar, and they had a son called Ishmael. You can read about that in Genesis chapter 16. But God had promised him a son by Sarah. But Abraham and Sarah, they decided they wanted to sort of take matters into their own hands. Abraham went to Egypt as well and lied there about Sarah. But even still, the promises that God had made to Abraham, he had made them. He had made them, and they were going to come true. God did not rescind his promise due to Abraham's disobedience, because it was unconditional. God didn't say, "I'm going to do this, Abraham, if you do that." God said, "I'm going to do this." And God was going to do it. So Abraham's failing was he disobeyed what God had said he had to do, or what God had said would happen. And he decided to take matters into his own hands with Sarah and Hagar. And God reacted. When Abraham's descendants, the nation of Israel, chose to disbelieve God's promise to protect and bless and guide them, God gave them over to bondage and separation from themselves. 430 years they were in Egypt. 430 years they were being distracted by the Egyptian gods, and then they were oppressed by the Egyptians. And we all know the story of what happened there. God could have said, it's your own fault. You disobeyed me. You didn't do what I asked you to do. Too bad. But he didn't. Grace comes that brings us into the next dispensation. The act of grace that anchors God's relationship with humanity is there, and it brings us into the next one, which we're not going to go into tonight. But it's there. God moves and he provides Moses to lead them out from under certain death. The oppression that they were facing in Egypt was killing them. The slavery, the brickmaking, all of those things, the things that was happening to them, the fear of Pharaoh that this nation of Israel would become so great that they would overpower the Egyptians, stopping them having children, killing the children if they had them. They were under oppression, and God heard them. God heard their cry, God heard their repentance, and provided in Moses a leader to lead them out from that certain death and from extinction, because that's what they were facing. That's what they were facing. The minute you start to control the population, it's not too long till it's gone. It's not too long. At Mount Sinai, God reminded the people, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians. He showed them, and he reminded them how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice, keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. A holy nation. These are the words you shall speak to the people of Israel. You can read that Exodus chapter 19 as it goes on. So the disposition of promise, the promise comes to Abraham. This is what I'm going to do, Abraham. I'm going to make you the biggest nation on the earth. Through you, every nation is going to be blessed. Your descendants. Abraham's response was, thank you, I believe you. But it waned and it fell away, and he started to doubt and he started to wonder, how's that going to be? We are getting old. And he decided to take matters into his own hands. That was man's response, and God's reaction was, let's bring this to an end. Let's bring this to a close. You're going to Egypt. Your disobedience is going to be a problem. God's grace was eventually Moses was going to lead them back out of there, right to the promised land. That's another story for another day, though, isn't it? So that was the three parts: God's intention, man's response, and God's reaction. And the 6 parts that the parts that make it up, if you like, the people, the patriarchs, Abram, Isaac, Jacob, all the way through. The time period was from the call of Abraham until Israel's arrival at Mount Sinai, 430 or so years again. 430 years or so later. Human responsibility was God wanted to give them a land, and they didn't get there for a long time. Failure was they ended up in Egypt. Judgment, bondage in Egypt. Grace, Moses was sent to deliver them and bring them out of that land. When the people were on the brink of entering into the promised land at Mount Sinai, God moved on to the fifth dispensation, that of the law. That of the law. I hope that's helpful. 2 more insights into sort of how they start, how they come about, how they end. God's intention, man's response, God's reaction, the people, the time period, etc. Interesting to know how it all fits together, and how I think it's just that for me, one of the great things that I smile on the inside moment was God's act of grace in response to man's rebellion was what moved us into the next dispensation. what moves us into the next dispensation.